The midday sun bore down on Dry Creek like a hammer on an anvil, beating the life out of everything it touched. Dust devils danced between the weathered buildings, carrying the stench of horse manure and cheap whiskey through the air. The town square, if you could call that patch of dirt and misery a square, buzzed with the kind of excitement that made decent folk look away. Nora Whitman stood with her wrists bound to the auction post, her dark hair hanging limp against her shoulders. The rope cut into her skin, but she'd stopped feeling it hours ago. What she felt instead was the weight of 100 eyes, some pitying, most hungry. Her dress, once blue as a summer sky, now hung gray with dust and despair. "Gentlemen," Josiah Briggs, the auctioneer, wiped his sweaty face with a yellowed handkerchief. "What we have here is prime property. Young widow, strong back, knows her way around a kitchen and a washboard. Who'll start the bidding?" The crowd pressed closer. Cowboys, merchants, drifters, all manner of men who'd crawled out from whatever rock they'd been hiding under. Nora recognized most of them. There was Samuel Hayes, the blacksmith who'd fixed her late husband's wagon wheel just last spring. Beside him stood Marcus Cole, who ran the general store where she'd bought flour on credit that would never be repaid. $20, someone shouted from the back. 25. 30. Sheriff Tom Hartley leaned against the saloon wall, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. His badge caught the sunlight, a mockery of everything it was supposed to represent. When Nora's eyes found his, he had the decency to look away, but not the spine to stop what was happening. "Now, boys," Briggs continued, "let's not forget what we're bidding on here. Mrs. Whitman's got skills beyond the domestic. She can read and write, knows her numbers, could keep books for the right establishment." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Everyone knew what kind of establishment he meant. The Yellow Rose sat at the end of Main Street, its painted ladies visible through the windows on any given night. $50. The voice belonged to Lyle Deacon, and the crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. He moved through them slow and deliberate, his black coat untouched by dust despite the wind. Everything about him was calculated from his trimmed mustache to the silver watch chain across his vest. He owned the Yellow Rose, half the businesses in town, and enough of the law to make the other half irrelevant. $50 from Mr. Deacon, Briggs announced, trying to hide his relief. "Do I hear 60? Silence fell over the square. Nobody bid against Lyle Deacon, not if they valued their livelihood, their health, or their life. Nora's knees trembled, but she locked them straight. She wouldn't give Deacon the satisfaction of seeing her fold. Her husband, God rest his soul, had been dead 3 months. 3 months since the fever took him, leaving her with debts she couldn't pay and a mortgage Deacon held. The law said a woman couldn't own property without a man to speak for her, the same law that now let them sell her like cattle. "50 going once," Briggs called out. "50 going twice. She ain't for sale." The voice came from the edge of the crowd, low and steady as distant thunder. Heads turned as a man stepped into the square. His boots raised small clouds of dust with each step, spurs singing a quiet song. Unlike Deacon's theatrical entrance, this man moved with the economy of someone who'd learned that wasted motion could get you killed. Elias Boone had the look of a man carved from the landscape itself. Sun-weathered face, eyes the color of winter sky, clothes that had seen better decades. His hat shadowed his features, but Nora could see the set of his jaw, stubborn as granite. She'd seen him in town maybe twice in the 5 years she'd lived here. Both times he'd bought supplies, spoken to no one beyond necessity, and disappeared back to wherever men like him came from. "Mr. Boone," Briggs stammered. "This is a legal proceeding. Mrs. Whitman's debts." "I said she ain't for sale." Elias stepped closer to the platform. "On account of she's my wife. If she says yes." The square erupted. Men shouted, cursed, laughed. Deacon's face darkened like a storm cloud. but his voice stayed smooth as snake oil when he spoke. "That's an interesting claim. Mr. Boone. Strange how nobody's heard of this marriage. Strange how the widow herself seems surprised." Elias looked up at Nora then. Really looked at her. Not the way the other men did, like she was goods to be appraised. He looked at her like she was a person with a choice to make. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I'm asking if you'll have me. Can't say it'll be easy. I got a ranch needs work, horses that need tending, but I can promise you this, you'll never stand on an auction block again." Nora's throat felt full of sand. She didn't know this man, had no reason to trust him beyond the fact that he was offering her a way out of hell. But sometimes, when you're drowning, you don't ask questions about the hand that pulls you up. "Yes," she whispered. "Louder, ma'am, so these gentlemen can hear." She raised her chin, found her voice. "Yes, I'll marry you." Elias nodded once, then turned to Briggs. "Cut her loose." "Now wait just a minute." Deacon stepped forward. "This is highly irregular. There are procedures. Documentation." "Cut her loose." Each word dropped like a stone into still water. Briggs looked to the sheriff, who suddenly found something fascinating about his boots. With shaking hands, the auctioneer pulled out a knife and sawed through the ropes. Nora's arms fell to her sides, numb and useless. Elias shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It smelled of leather and trail dust and something else pine, maybe from wherever he made his home. He offered his arm, and she took it, her fingers barely able to grip. "This isn't over," Deacon said quietly as they passed. "You can't just walk in here and—" "Mr. Deacon." Elias stopped, turned slightly. "I've been riding this territory since before you learned to knot that fancy tie. I know what's mine and what ain't. The lady made her choice. You'd do well to respect it." They walked through the crowd, Nora's legs threatening to give out with each step. Men stepped aside, some grumbling, others silent. She caught Marcus Cole's eye and saw something there, shame. Maybe, or just relief that it wasn't his wife or daughter on that platform. Elias's horse waited at the hitching post, a bay mare that looked like she could run forever. He helped Nora up, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, and she found herself leaning back against him, too exhausted to care about propriety. "Where are we going?" she asked as they rode out of town. "Home," he said simply. "Got questions? I reckon I'll answer what I can, but first, we need distance between us and that crowd." Behind them, Dry Creek grew smaller, its buildings shrinking to matchboxes against the vast canvas of prairie and sky. Nora didn't look back. There was nothing there for her now but bad memories and the ghost of the woman she used to be. "Why?" she finally asked when the town had vanished behind a rise. "Why did you do it?" Elias was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, like he was working out the words as he said them. "Man spends enough time alone. He gets to thinking about things. What matters, what doesn't. Saw you standing there, proud despite everything. Reminded me that there's still something in this world worth standing up for. You don't know me." "No, ma'am, I don't. But I know what it's like to have your choices taken away. Figured everyone deserves at least one person willing to give them back." They rode in silence after that, the mare's hooves beating a steady rhythm against the hard-packed earth. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of copper and rose. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the sound lonely and wild. Nora closed her eyes, let the motion of the horse carry her. She'd made a deal with a stranger to escape a devil. Whether Elias Boone was her salvation or just another kind of damnation remained to be seen. But for now, for this moment, she was moving away from that auction block. That had to count for something. The ranch appeared just as the last light bled from the sky. It wasn't much, a modest house with a wraparound porch, a barn that had seen better days, and a corral where a handful of horses raised their heads to watch them approach. But after the nightmare of Dry Creek, it looked like paradise. Elias dismounted first, then helped Nora down. Her legs buckled slightly, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. The simple kindness of it touching her like she was made of something more than desperation, and debt nearly undid her. "Come on inside," he said. "I'll get you something to eat." The house was sparse but clean. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen table scarred by years of use, 2 doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything had the look of a place maintained by someone who did what needed doing and no more. Elias lit a lamp, the warm glow pushing back the gathering darkness. He moved to the stove, efficient and practiced. "Sit," he said, nodding to a chair. "You look ready to fall over." Nora sat. The events of the day crashed over her like a flash flood. This morning she'd woken in her empty house, knowing what was coming. Now she sat in a stranger's kitchen, wearing his coat, calling herself his wife. "I need to know," she said, watching him slice bread and cold meat. "What you expect from me?" His hands stilled for a moment. "Expect—" "You said I was your wife, in front of the whole town." The words felt strange in her mouth. "Men don't do that without wanting something in return." Elias set a plate in front of her, then poured water from a pitcher. He took the chair across from her, his expression thoughtful. "What I said back there was to get you off that platform, nothing more. You're not beholden to me. Mrs. Whitman." "Nora," she corrected automatically. "And that's not how the law sees it, or the town. They think we're married now." "Let them think what they want." He leaned back in his chair. "You needed help. I gave it. Come morning. If you want to leave, I'll take you wherever you want to go. If you want to stay." He shrugged. "Place could use a woman's touch." "I suppose, but that's your choice to make." She studied him in the lamplight. His face was all angles and weathered lines, like something carved by wind and time. There was a scar through his left eyebrow, old and white. His hands, resting on the table, were scarred too, the hands of a man who'd worked hard and fought harder. "Why?" she asked again. "The truth this time. Men don't risk making an enemy of Lyle Deacon for strangers." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You always this suspicious?" "Experience teaches hard lessons. Mr. Boone." "Elias," he said, "and fair enough." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what it's like, watching something wrong happen and doing nothing about it. Most folks in Dry Creek know that feeling." "Yeah, well, I've had my fill of it. Spent too many years looking the other way, telling myself it wasn't my business. Gets to where you can't look at yourself in the mirror anymore." He met her eyes. "Saw you on that platform. Saw Deacon circling like a buzzard. Figured maybe it was time I remembered how to give a damn about something besides my horses and my fence lines." Nora took a bite of bread, chewed slowly. It was good bread, better than she'd expected from a bachelor's kitchen. "You know he won't let this go. Deacon, he's not the forgiving type." "I know what he is." There was steel in Elias's voice now. "Question is, do you really know?" She set down the bread. "What do you mean? You lived in town 5 years. You must have heard stories. About the women who come through on the freight wagons. About what happens to them." A chill ran down her spine. "Saloon girls. For the Yellow Rose." "That's what he calls them." Elias's jaw tightened. "But I've seen those wagons. Heard things from men who drink too much and talk too loose. Those women don't come willing, and they don't leave at all." Nora's hands trembled slightly. She'd heard whispers. Of course, everyone had. But in a town like Dry Creek, you learn not to ask questions about Lyle Deacon's business. "My husband used to say Deacon had the sheriff in his pocket," she said quietly. "Said half the town council owed him money or favors or both." "Your husband was a smart man." "Not smart enough to stay alive." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "Sorry, that's not—" "He was a good man. Just not strong enough for this place. Takes a particular kind of strength to survive out here. Elias stood, began clearing the dishes. Different kind than what they teach you back east. Is that where you're from back east? He glanced at her, that almost smile returning. Pennsylvania, originally. Long time ago. Ohio. Came out here with my parents when I was 17. They died the first winter. Fever. She hadn't meant to tell him that, but something about the quiet kitchen, the simple meal, made the words come easier. Met Thomas, my husband, the next spring. He seemed safe. But not strong. No, she admitted. Not strong. Elias dried his hands on a cloth, then turned to face her. I meant what I said. This place is yours as long as you want it. But if you stay, there are things we need to settle. Such as, first, the story. Far as anyone knows, we've been courting quiet-like. Kept it secret because, he thought for a moment, because your husband was my friend, and we didn't want to disrespect his memory by moving too quick. Nobody will believe that. You barely came to town. That's what makes it believable. Nobody knows enough about me to say different. He pulled out a chair, straddled it backwards. Second, the ranch. You pull your weight. Help with what needs doing. Cooking, mending, maybe help with the horses if you're inclined. In exchange, you got a roof, food, and protection. And third, his eyes were steady on hers. The third is about respect. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. You got your space, I got mine. No expectations beyond what we agree to plain and clear. You're a free woman. Nora, I aim to keep it that way. She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. After months of being treated like property, like something less than human, his simple declaration of her freedom was almost too much to bear. I can work, she said when she trusted her voice. I'm good with numbers. Like Briggs said, can keep books, manage accounts. I know horses too, my father raised them. That'll be useful. Ranch doesn't run itself. And if Deacon comes, when, Elias corrected. When he comes, we deal with it, together, but that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you need rest. He stood, walked to one of the doors. This is your room. Ain't much, but the bed's clean and the door locks from the inside. My room's there. He pointed to the other door. You need anything, you call out. Nora rose, still wearing his coat. She started to shrug it off, but he waved a hand. Keep it tonight. Cold gets in through the walls sometimes. She paused at the doorway to her room. What a strange thought, and looked back at him. Elias. Yeah. What you did today, I won't forget it. He ducked his head, suddenly looking younger despite the lines on his face. Get some rest. Nora. Morning comes early on a ranch. She entered the room and closed the door, turning the lock with fingers that shook slightly. The click of it, that simple ability to lock a door, to choose who entered her space, was its own kind of miracle. The room was plain, but clean. As he'd said, a narrow bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a dresser with a chipped mirror, a window that looked out toward the mountains. She sat on the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of the day. This morning she'd been ready to die, rather than become Deacon's property. Tonight she sat in a locked room, a free woman in all but law, protected by a man who asked nothing from her but honest work. Through the thin walls, she could hear Elias moving around, the quiet sounds of a house settling for the night. Outside, an owl called, and the wind whispered secrets to the prairie grass. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Deacon wouldn't let this insult stand. The town would gossip. There would be consequences for Elias's act of defiance, and by extension, for her. But tonight, for the first time in months, Nora Whitman felt something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. The riders came on the fourth day, just as the morning mist lifted from the valley. Nora saw them first, three dark shapes moving against the golden grass. She was hanging wash on the line, had been learning the rhythms of ranch life, when the hair on her neck stood up. "Elias," she called, keeping her voice steady. He emerged from the barn, took one look at her face, then followed her gaze to the horizon. His expression didn't change, but she saw his hand move to rest on his hip, near the pistol he always wore. "Go inside," he said quietly. "But don't run, and don't lock the door." "Why not?" "Because locked doors make men curious. Open ones just make them cautious." She gathered the wet clothes in the basket, forcing herself to move naturally. Inside. She set the basket down and moved to the window where she could watch without being seen. The riders stopped at the gate. She recognized one immediately. Jake Morrison, one of Deacon's men, the kind who enjoyed his work too much. The other two were strangers, but they had the same look about them. Wolves in men's clothing. Elias walked out to meet them, unhurried. He stopped a good distance from the gate, hands visible but ready. "Morning, boys," he said. "Something I can help you with." Morrison spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Mister, Deacon sends his regards. Wants to make sure you're settling in proper with your new wife." "That's neighborly of him. Real neighborly." Morrison's grin was all teeth and no warmth. "Fact is, he's concerned there might have been some misunderstanding back in town. Papers filed wrong, that sort of thing." "No misunderstanding. The lady made her choice clear enough." "See, that's where it gets complicated." Morrison leaned forward in his saddle. "Mr. Deacon, he had a legal claim, debts owed, property rights. Can't just walk away from that because some cowboy plays hero." Elias shifted slightly, subtle but significant. Nora had seen him work with the horses, knew how he could read their moods in the tiniest movements. Now he was reading these men the same way. "Tell Deacon if he's got legal concerns. He can take them up with the judge. Not with my wife." "Your wife?" Morrison laughed. "That's rich. Everyone knows Elias Boone's been living alone out here for years. Suddenly he's got himself a bride, mighty convenient." "Life's full of surprises." One of the other riders, a thin man with dead eyes, spoke up. "Mister, Deacon's a reasonable man. He's willing to compensate you for your trouble. Say $200, more than fair for a few days' inconvenience." "Not for sale." "Everything's for sale. Boone, just a matter of price." "You boys deaf? I said she's not for sale." "Now, you've delivered your message. Time to move along." Morrison's hand drifted toward his gun. "Maybe you need more convincing." The click of a rifle being cocked echoed across the yard. Nora gasped. She hadn't even seen Elias move, but suddenly he held a Winchester, barrel pointed steady at Morrison's chest. "Maybe you need to think real careful about your next move," Elias said, his voice calm as still water. "You're on my land, threatening my wife. Law's pretty clear about a man's right to defend his property." "3 against 1 ain't good odds," the thin man said. "You're right." Elias's smile was sharp as winter. "You boys should have brought more men." For a long moment, nobody moved. Nora held her breath, her fingers white-knuckled on the window frame. Then Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This ain't over. Boone, Mr. Deacon don't like being disappointed. Then he's in for a rough time. Now get off my land." The riders wheeled their horses around, but Morrison looked back. His eyes found the window where Nora stood, and he touched his hat in a mockery of politeness. The threat in that gesture was clearer than any words. Elias stood watching until they were out of sight, then walked back to the house. Nora met him at the door. "They'll be back," she said. "Yes." "With more men?" "Probably." She studied his face, looking for fear or doubt, but found neither. "You could have taken the money. $200 is more than fair for—" "For what? For treating you like property." He set the rifle by the door. "That what you think you're worth?" $200. The question stung. "I think I'm not worth dying for." Nobody said anything about dying. He moved past her to the stove, poured coffee from the pot that always seemed to be brewing. But living's not worth much if you can't look yourself in the mirror. I told you that first night you're free. That means something to me, even if it don't mean nothing to Deacon. She sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted, though it was barely past breakfast. Tell me about the wagons. Elias paused, cup halfway to his lips. What? The freight wagons, the women. You mentioned them that first night. I need to know what we're really fighting. He set down the cup, pulled out a chair across from her. For a moment, he just sat, gathering his words. Started noticing about 2 years back, wagons coming through at night, taking the old mining road instead of the main trail. Curious, but not my business. Then one night, I was out looking for a lost calf. Heard something that didn't sound right. What kind of something? His jaw tightened. Crying. From inside one of the wagons. Not just one voice, several young voices. Nora's stomach turned. You're saying he's bringing in women against their will. That's exactly what I'm saying. But it's smart. See, he brings them from far off California, Mexico, places where nobody's gonna come looking. By the time they get here, they're too scared or broken to run. But surely someone would notice. The sheriff. The sheriff takes his cut and looks the other way, just like half the town council, just like the judge. Deacon's got his fingers in everything. She thought of the yellow rose, of the women she'd seen in the windows. She'd assumed they were there by choice, chasing fortune like everyone else in the West. The truth was uglier, darker. That's why you couldn't let him take me. Partly. Elias met her eyes. Also because what they were doing selling you in the town square like livestock, it was wrong. Don't need no complicated reason beyond that. A comfortable silence fell between them. Outside, a hawk circled lazy patterns in the sky. The morning sun painted everything golden, peaceful. It was hard to believe violence had just visited this place. Harder still to believe it would return. There's something else, Nora said finally. When Morrison was leaving, he marked me, looked right at me through the window. He wanted me to know he'd seen me. I noticed. So what do we do? Elias leaned back in his chair. First, we make this marriage look real. People need to believe it, not just hear about it. Means you come to town with me for supplies. We act like proper newlyweds. And second, we find proof about those wagons. Deacon's careful, but nobody's perfect. There's got to be evidence somewhere. Records, witnesses, something. That's dangerous. If he suspects, he already suspects. Question is whether he thinks we're just protecting ourselves or if we're a real threat. He paused, considering. There's a man in town might help. Reverend Samuel Bartlett. He's been asking questions about those wagons too, careful-like. But I noticed. A reverend, is he trustworthy? In Dry Creek, trust is a luxury. But he's got less reason to be in Deacon's pocket than most. And he's got influence with the good families, the ones who still care about right and wrong. Nora nodded slowly. A plan was forming in her mind. Hazy, but taking shape. When Thomas died, I went through his papers. He kept careful records of everything, too careful. Maybe there was a ledger I didn't understand. Transactions that didn't make sense. I thought it was about his debts. But what if it wasn't? What if he saw something, knew something? She stood, pacing now. The ledger's still at the house, if Deacon hasn't cleared it out yet. Too risky. You can't go back there. Not alone, she agreed. But with my husband to collect my remaining belongings, that would seem natural enough. Elias considered this. Maybe, but not yet. Let things settle first. Let Deacon think we're just playing house, trying to wait him out. While more wagons come, while more women disappear into the yellow rose. While we stay alive long enough to help them, he said firmly. Dead heroes don't save anyone. Nora, we do this smart, or we don't do it at all. She wanted to argue, But the wisdom in his words was undeniable. She'd seen what happened to people who moved against Deacon without thinking. They ended up in unmarked graves out in the desert. If they were lucky. "All right," she said. "We do it your way. For now." "For now," he agreed. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "You know, you're not what I expected when I rode into town that day." "What did you expect?" "Someone broken, someone looking to be saved." He shook his head. "Instead, I got someone looking to fight. Not sure if that makes me lucky or cursed." "Maybe both," she said, and found herself smiling back. The sound of horses made them both tense, but it was just the ranch horses in the corral, restless and ready for the day's work. Normal sounds, normal life. She was learning to tell the difference, learning the rhythms of this place that was becoming home. "I should check on the animals," Elias said, standing. "You'll be all right." "I'll be fine. Might work on the books. Your records are a mess." Thomas kept good records. Did he? Too good. Like I said, everything in its place. Every penny accounted for. She paused, struck by a thought. "Elias, what if that's why he died? Not the fever, but because he knew too much." Elias's expression darkened. "Wouldn't be the first time someone in Dry Creek died convenient-like, but that's another thing we can't prove. Yet." After he left, Nora sat at the kitchen table with his ledgers, trying to make sense of years of haphazard bookkeeping. But her mind kept drifting to Thomas, to his meticulous nature and sudden illness, to the ledger hidden in their old house, full of secrets she'd been too grief-stricken to decode. Through the window, she watched Elias work with the horses, patient and sure. He moved like a man comfortable in his own skin, at peace with his choices. She envied that peace, even as she felt it beginning to take root in her own chest. They were building something here, she realized. Not just a false marriage to fool the town, but a partnership, a foundation for whatever fight was coming. Because it was coming, Morrison's visit had made that clear. Deacon wouldn't let this insult stand. He'd push and push hard until something broke. Nora just had to make sure that when the breaking came, it wasn't them who shattered. The letter arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by a nervous boy who wouldn't meet their eyes, official-looking, with the seal of the territorial court. Elias read it once, then handed it to Nora. "Deacon's making his move," he said simply. The document claimed their marriage was invalid. No proper witnesses, no legal documentation. It demanded Nora return to town to settle her late husband's debts or face imprisonment. The signature at the bottom belonged to Judge Clarence Whitford, but they both knew whose hand had really written it. "He's using the law against us," Nora said, setting the paper down with steady hands though her heart raced. "Just like he uses everything else. Law's only as good as the men enforcing it." Elias moved to the window, watching the dust cloud from the messenger's departure. "We knew this was coming. So what do? We can't fight a judge." "Can't fight him legal-wise, no, but there's more than one kind of law out here." He turned back to her. "Time to visit town. Make our presence known. Show them we're not hiding." The next morning, they hitched up the wagon. Nora wore her best dress, cleaned and mended now, and Elias had trimmed his beard, looking almost respectable. As they rode, she noticed him checking their surroundings more than usual, hand never far from his rifle. "You expecting trouble?" "Always expect trouble. That way you're never disappointed." Dry Creek looked the same as ever, dusty, tired, caught between civilization and wildness. But Nora felt the eyes on them as they rolled down Main Street. Curtains twitched. Conversations stopped. News of Deacon's legal challenge had spread, turning them into a spectacle once again. Their first stop was the general store. Marcus Cole stood behind the counter, and his face went pale when they entered. Mrs. Boone," he stammered. "Elias, what can I do for you?" "Supplies," Elias said easily, handing over a list. And my wife needs fabric. Winter's coming. As Marcus gathered their goods, trying not to stare, Nora moved through the store with deliberate calm. She selected fabric, thread, buttons, the ordinary purchases of a rancher's wife. Let them see her choosing, planning, building a future. Let them see she wasn't running. Nora. She turned to find Mary Patterson, the doctor's wife, standing uncertainly nearby. They'd been friendly once, before Thomas died and everything fell apart. "Mary," Nora said warmly, "how are you?" I'm well." Mary glanced around nervously, then stepped closer. "We heard about the judge's letter. It's not right, what they're doing to you." "No," Nora agreed quietly. "It's not. Some of us, the ladies from church, we've been talking about a lot of things, about what happens in this town that shouldn't." Mary's voice dropped even lower. "If you need help, real help, you come to us. You hear?" Before Nora could respond, Mary squeezed her hand and hurried away. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Their next stop was more calculated, the church. Reverend Bartlett was in the yard, tending to the small cemetery. He looked up as they approached, his weathered face showing no surprise. "Mr. Boone, Mrs. Boone, I've been expecting you." "Reverend," Elias said, "we need to talk." Bartlett nodded, gesturing toward the church, inside. The air was cool and quiet, dust motes dancing in the colored light from the windows. They sat in a back pew, voices low. "I know why you're here," Bartlett said without preamble. "About the wagons, about what Deacon does with those poor souls." "You've seen them?" Nora asked. "Seen enough, heard more. Confession's a sacred trust. But when someone's breaking God's law and man's law, both..." He shook his head. "I've written to the territorial governor, to anyone who might listen, but Deacon's reach is long." "We need proof," Elias said. "Something that can't be ignored or bought off." Bartlett was quiet for a moment. Then, "There's a girl, Maria. She escaped from the Yellow Rose 3 months back. I've been hiding her, moving her between safe houses. She could testify if she had protection." "Where is she now?" "That I won't say, not yet. But if you can guarantee her safety, real safety." He looked between them. "She knows things, names, dates, where the wagons come from. She could bring Deacon down." "Or get us all killed," Elias said bluntly. "Yes," Bartlett agreed. "That too." They were discussing details when the church door slammed open. Sheriff Hartley stood silhouetted against the bright daylight, hand on his pistol. "Boone," he said, "Judge wants to see you, both of you, now." "Since when does a judge send the sheriff to fetch people for a social call?" Elias asked. "Not moving?" "Since that judge has questions about the validity of certain claims." Hartley's face was flushed, sweat beading despite the cool morning. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Elias and Nora exchanged glances. They'd expected this, but not so soon. "We'll come," Elias said finally. "Peaceful-like. Reverend. We'll continue our discussion later." The courthouse sat at the end of Main Street, trying to look imposing despite peeling paint and crooked shutters. Inside, Judge Whitford waited in his chambers, Deacon standing behind him like a shadow in expensive clothes. "Ah, the happy couple," Deacon said, his smile sharp as broken glass. "How good of you to come." "Judge," Elias said, ignoring Deacon. "You wanted to see us?" Whitford shuffled papers nervously. He was a small man, made smaller by Deacon's presence. "Yes, well, there are questions about your marriage. No witnesses have come forward. No documentation exists." "I witnessed it." Nora interrupted. "So did Elias. So did half the town when he claimed me as his wife. What more witness do you need?" "Legal witnesses, that is, Miss The judge stumbled over her name. The law requires a declaration of intent and mutual consent. Elias said, which we gave, publicly. Unless you're saying the word of 30 townspeople ain't worth nothing. Those people were there for other business, Deacon said smoothly. Hardly proper witnesses to a wedding. Other business, Nora repeated, her voice like ice. You mean the business of selling me like cattle, that business? You had debts, Deacon said, legal obligations. You can't simply... Show me the paper, Elias demanded. Show me the legal document that says a widow can be sold for her husband's debts. Show me where it's written in any law book that a free woman can be put on an auction block. Silence fell. The judge fidgeted with his gavel. Deacon's smile never wavered, but his eyes were cold as winter stones. The debt exists, Deacon said finally. $300, owed to various creditors. I purchased those debts, making me the primary creditor. The law is clear about property seizure for unpaid debts. And I'm willing to pay. Elias said, $300, cash, to settle my wife's obligations. That surprised them. Nora saw Deacon's eyes narrow, calculating. The debt has grown, he said. Interest, collection fees. Call it $500 now. $300, Elias repeated. The original amount. Take it or leave it. I think I'll leave it. Deacon moved around the desk, closer to them. You see, this isn't really about money. Boone, it's about order. About knowing your place. You disrupted something that day at the auction. Set a bad example. Can't have every cowboy thinking he can ride in and play hero. So what do you want? Nora asked, though she already knew. I want what's mine, Deacon said simply. You, working off your debt in my establishment? It's honest work for honest pay. Your establishment, she said slowly, where women arrive in wagons at night and never leave. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Deacon's smile finally disappeared. Careful, Mrs. Boone. Baseless accusations can be legally actionable. Slander's a serious charge. A truth ain't slander, Elias said. Prove its truth, Deacon challenged. Prove any of your wild stories. You can't, because they're fantasies, desperate lies from desperate people. Judge Whitford cleared his throat. Perhaps we could reach a compromise. If Mr. Boone agrees to pay the original debt plus reasonable interest, say $400, we could consider the matter settled. No, Deacon said flatly. The woman comes with me, or I'll have every legal means at my disposal brought against them. Fraud, theft, conspiracy. That's enough, Elias said, standing. We've heard your threats. Here's mine. You come near my wife. You send any more of your boys to my ranch. You try any more legal tricks, and we'll have a different kind of discussion. The kind that doesn't happen in a courthouse. Are you threatening me? Boone, in front of a judge and the sheriff. I'm promising you, Elias said calmly. Man to man. You know who I am. Deacon. You know what I've done. I've been peaceable these last years. But that can change. Push me and find out how much. He took Nora's arm, and they walked out, leaving silence behind them. Outside, Nora realized she was trembling, but not from fear, from anger. He's going to come after us harder now, she said. Let him come, Elias said grimly. We've got work to do. They spent the rest of the day in town, making their presence known. They had lunch at the hotel dining room, where whispers followed them like smoke. They visited the bank, where Elias made a show of checking his accounts healthy enough to pay debts. The banker would gossip later. They stopped at the blacksmith, the feed store, acting like any married couple planning for the future. But Nora noticed things, the way certain women watched her with a mixture of pity and hope, the way men's conversations died when Elias passed. The town was divided, she realized. those who stood with Deacon from greed or fear, and those who were tired of both. As they loaded the wagon to leave, Mary Patterson appeared again, pressing a small package into Nora's hands. "From the church ladies," she whispered. "Don't open it here." They were a mile out of town before Nora unwrapped it. Inside was money, not much, but enough to matter, and a note. "For those who need sanctuary, you are not alone." "Seems you made an impression," Elias said. "We made an impression," she corrected. "This fight isn't just ours anymore." As the ranch came into view, Nora felt something shift inside her. This morning, she'd been scared of what Deacon might do. Now she was angry about what he'd already done. The fear was still there, but it had transformed into something harder, more useful. "Elias," she said as they pulled up to the house, "I want to learn to shoot." He glanced at her, eyebrows raised. "If trouble's coming," she continued, "I want to be ready. I'm tired of being protected. I want to protect myself." "All right," he said after a moment. "We'll start tomorrow. But Nora, learning to shoot's one thing. Being ready to pull the trigger when it counts, that's another." "I know," she said quietly. "But I'm tired of being the one things happen to. It's time I started happening back." That night, as they ate dinner, the package from the church ladies sat between them on the table. Such a small thing, but it represented something larger. They weren't alone. The town might be under Deacon's thumb, but not everyone was content to stay there. "What Bartlett said about that girl, Maria," Nora began. "If we could get her somewhere safe, somewhere Deacon can't reach." "I've been thinking the same." Elias pushed his plate aside. "I know a federal marshal in Denver. Honest man, or was last I knew. If we could get her there, get her testimony to someone with real authority." "It's dangerous. Everything's dangerous now. Question is, which danger's worth facing?" They planned late into the night, voices low, mapping out possibilities. Outside, coyotes howled at the moon, and the wind carried the scent of coming rain. Change was in the air. Nora could feel it. The battle lines were drawn now. No more pretending. No more playing at marriage while hoping Deacon would lose interest. This was war, fought with laws and lies, threats and alliances. But for the first time since Thomas died, Nora felt ready for the fight. The morning of reckoning came with thunderclouds on the horizon. Nora woke to find Elias already dressed, checking his rifle at the kitchen table. "They're coming," he said simply. Spotted dust clouds from the ridge, maybe a dozen riders. She dressed quickly, hands steady despite her racing heart. 3 weeks had passed since their confrontation at the courthouse. 3 weeks of preparation, of secret meetings with Reverend Bartlett, of Nora learning to handle a pistol until her aim was true. Now the waiting was over. "Where's Maria?" she asked. "Safe. Bartlett moved her last night to the Hendricks farm. They're good people. They'll keep her hidden until we can get her to Denver." Nora strapped on the gun belt Elias had given her, the weight still foreign but no longer frightening. Through the window, she could see the riders approaching, dark shapes against the golden grass. "Remember what we discussed," Elias said. "If this goes bad, I get to the root cellar, bar the door, wait for help." She met his eyes. "But I'm not hiding while you face them alone." "Nora." "No," her voice was firm. "We stand together, or we don't stand at all." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the riders were at the gate now. Deacon led them, dressed in black despite the heat. Morrison at his right hand, behind them. Sheriff Hartley looked uncomfortable on his horse, badge glinting in the morning sun. But it was what came after that made Nora's blood run cold. A wagon, covered in canvas, with iron bars visible through gaps in the fabric, the kind of wagon used to transport prisoners, or worse. Elias stepped out onto the porch, rifle casual in his hands. Nora followed, standing slightly behind but clearly visible. Let them see her armed. Let them know she wouldn't go quietly. "Morning, Deacon," Elias called, Bit early for a social call." "This isn't social. Boone." Deacon's voice carried across the yard. "I have legal papers. The judge has ruled your marriage invalid. Mrs. Whitman is to return with us to settle her obligations." "I see Sheriff Hartley," Elias said. "I see your hired guns. What I don't see is any judge. Papers can say anything if you pay the right man to write them." Deacon pulled a document from his coat, held it up, signed and sealed. "You can examine it if you like." "I can read it from here," Nora called out, surprising them. "And what I read is lies written by a coward who hides behind the law when it suits him and breaks it when it doesn't." Morrison laughed. "She's got spirit. Deacon, she'll do well at the Rose once we break her in." The casual cruelty of it, the assumption of her fate, lit a fire in Nora's chest. She stepped forward, past Elias despite his warning gesture. "I'm going to say this once," she said, voice carrying clear and strong. "So listen well, all of you. I am not property. I am not for sale. I am a free woman, married in the sight of God and man, and I will die before I let you put me in that wagon." "That can be arranged," Morrison said, hand moving toward his gun. The click of multiple rifles being cocked echoed across the yard, but it didn't come from Deacon's men. From the barn, the smokehouse, behind the water trough, men emerged, ranchers and townspeople. Faces Nora recognized. Jim Henderson from the neighboring ranch, Bob Carter who ran the livery stable, even Marcus Cole from the general store, looking terrified but holding a shotgun steady. And from the house itself, women appeared. Mary Patterson, Reverend Bartlett's wife, the schoolteacher, the baker's widow, a dozen of them, maybe more, all armed, all standing with Nora and Elias. "Seems you miscounted, Deacon," Elias said mildly. "You're not the only one with friends." Deacon's face had gone pale, then flushed with rage. "This is conspiracy rebellion, Sheriff! Arrest them all!" But Hartley didn't move. He sat his horse, looking at the assembled townspeople, people he knew, people whose children played with his, whose wives talked with his wife. His hand stayed far from his gun. "Tum," Deacon's voice was dangerous now. "I said arrest them." "No, sir," Hartley said quietly. "I don't believe I will." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Deacon laughed, cold and sharp. "You think this changes anything? You think your little mob scares me?" He looked around at the assembled crowd. "I know each of you, where you live, where your children go to school, where your wives shop. You stand against me today. But what about tomorrow? What about when you're alone? That's the thing about us common folk." Jim Henderson spoke up. "We're never really alone. You touch one of us, you touch all of us, and we're done being afraid." "Pretty words," Morrison said, "but words don't stop bullets." "No," Elias agreed. "They don't." What happened next occurred so fast Nora almost missed it. Morrison's hand moved for his gun, fast as a snake, but Elias was faster. His rifle spoke once, and Morrison's pistol went spinning from his hand, the man clutching his bleeding fingers with a howl. "Next one's center mass," Elias said calmly. "Any of you boys feeling lucky?" Nobody moved. Deacon's men might have been killers, but they weren't stupid. The math had changed. It wasn't 12 against 2 anymore, it was 12 against 30, and the 30 had the high ground and righteousness on their side. "There's something else," Nora said into the tense silence. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a leather journal. "This belonged to my late husband. He kept records, you see, very detailed records, including transactions that seemed strange at the time but make sense now." Deacon's eyes fixed on the journal like a snake watching a mouse. "Payments to freight companies for special cargo," Nora continued. "Dates and amounts, names of drivers, even notes about where the cargo originated." She looked directly at Deacon. "My husband might have been weak, but he wasn't stupid. He knew what you were doing. He documented it all." That proves nothing, Deacon said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. By itself, maybe not. Reverend Bartlett stepped forward. But combined with testimony from someone who survived your employment, someone who can name names, describe faces, tell exactly how your operation works. You're bluffing. Maria Rodriguez, Bartlett said simply. Brought here 6 months ago from California. Kept prisoner at the Yellow Rose until she escaped. She's prepared to testify. Not to Judge Whitford, to the federal marshal in Denver, the one who's already on his way here. That was a lie. Nora knew. The marshal hadn't been contacted yet, but Deacon didn't know that, and the fear that flashed across his face was worth the deception. You've lost, Deacon, Elias said. Question is, how you want this to end. You can ride out now, take your boys and go, or we can settle this the hard way. Your choice. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Nora could hear her heartbeat, could feel sweat trickling down her back despite the morning cool. So many guns, so many ways this could go wrong. One nervous trigger finger could turn the yard into a battleground. Then Sheriff Hartley did something unexpected. He pulled off his badge, threw it in the dirt at Deacon's feet. I'm done, he said. Done looking the other way. Done being bought. You want to fight these people, you do it without me. He turned his horse and rode away. Not fast, but steady, never looking back. His departure broke something in Deacon's men. They were killers for hire, not martyrs for a cause. Without the cover of law, they were just what they'd always been, thugs and criminals. One by one, they began backing their horses away, hands visible, intentions clear. They weren't running, exactly, but they weren't fighting either. This isn't over, Deacon said, his voice thick with rage. You think you've won? I own this town. I own the judge, the bank, half the businesses. I'll destroy each and every one of you. No, Mary Patterson said, stepping forward. You won't, because we've already sent word to the territorial governor, to newspapers in Denver and San Francisco, to anyone who'll listen about what happens in Dry Creek. Your days of owning this town are over. Deacon looked around at the faces surrounding him. Men and women he dismissed as weak, as beneath notice. Now they stood together, armed with more than guns, armed with unity and purpose. Get out, Elias said quietly. Take your wagon, take your men, and get out. Don't come back. If I see you on my land again, if you threaten my wife again, if you so much as look at any of these people wrong, I'll kill you. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Deacon's hand twitched toward his gun, but 30 rifles shifting stopped him cold. He wasn't brave. Nora realized he'd never been brave. He was just a bully who'd found a town weak enough to dominate. But the town wasn't weak anymore. You'll regret this, he said finally. All of you. Only thing I regret, Nora said, is that it took us so long to stand up to you. Deacon wheeled his horse around, his remaining men following. The wagon driver looked uncertain until Morrison, still cradling his injured hand, snarled at him to move. They rode away in a cloud of dust and defeat, the empty prison wagon rattling behind them like chains. Nobody moved until they were out of sight. Then, as if a spell had been broken, people began to laugh, to cry, to embrace. Jim Henderson clapped Elias on the back. Mary Patterson hugged Nora so tight she could barely breathe. It's not over, Reverend Bartlett warned quietly. Men like Deacon don't give up easy. He'll be back, or he'll send others. Maybe, Elias agreed. But not today, and not tomorrow. We'll worry about the next fight when it comes. As the crowd began to disperse, neighbors helping neighbors back to their homes and lives, Nora stood with Elias on the porch. The storm clouds had passed without breaking, leaving clear sky in their wake. That was brave, what you did, Elias said, standing up to him like that. I wasn't brave, Nora admitted. I was angry at what he's done, what he would keep doing. Sometimes anger's stronger than fear. And the Journal Thomas really kept those records. She smiled slightly. He did, but not about the wagons. Those entries I mentioned I may have embellished. The real journal just has grain purchases and feed costs. Elias stared at her for a moment, then laughed a real laugh, deep and genuine. You bluffed Lyle Deacon with a book of grain receipts. Sometimes the threat of truth is more powerful than truth itself, she said. Besides, we have Maria's real testimony. That wasn't a lie. No, he agreed. That wasn't a lie. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. The ranch looked the same as it had that morning, but everything had changed. They'd drawn a line in the sand and held it. More importantly, they hadn't held it alone. Thank you, Nora said softly, for that first day, for giving me a choice when everyone else saw me as property. You don't owe me thanks, Elias said. You'd have found your own way. You're stronger than you knew. Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out alone. As they turned to go inside, to begin the work of a normal day on the ranch, Nora felt something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. Peace. Not the peace of surrender or hiding, but the peace that comes from standing your ground and discovering you're stronger than what tried to break you. The fight with Deacon wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more threats, but today, they'd won. And sometimes, that was enough. The dust had settled on Dry Creek, but the echoes of change still rang through its streets. 3 days after the confrontation at the ranch, Nora stood in what had been the Yellow Rose, now emptied of its misery and shame. Sunlight streamed through windows that had been painted black, revealing the truth of what this place had been. We'll burn it, Mary Patterson said beside her, voice hard with determination. Every board, every nail, let it be ashes. No, Nora said quietly. We'll change it. Make it something else, something good. These walls have seen enough destruction. Around them, the women of Dry Creek moved through the building like a cleansing tide. They'd found evidence of Deacon's crimes in his hasty departure ledgers, receipts, even photographs that would ensure he never returned. But they'd also found empty rooms that spoke of stolen lives, and those silent testimonies hit harder than any written proof. Elias appeared in the doorway, Sheriff Hartley's badge pinned to his vest. The town council had voted unanimously after Hartley's resignation. It was temporary. Elias insisted, just until they could find someone permanent. But Nora saw how naturally authority sat on his shoulders, how people looked to him now. Federal Marshal's here, he said. Wants to talk to you about the journal. She nodded, following him out. The street looked different now, cleaner somehow, though nothing physical had changed. Maybe it was just the absence of fear that made everything seem brighter. The marshal, a stern man named William Garrett, sat in what had been Deacon's office at the bank. They'd frozen all of Deacon's assets, found enough evidence of fraud and trafficking to put him away for life if they could catch him. Mrs. Boone. Garrett nodded. I've read your husband's journal, the real one, not the story you spun for Deacon. Thomas Whitman was documenting something. All right, but it wasn't freight records. Nora sat carefully, Elias standing behind her chair. What was it? Land fraud. Your husband discovered that Deacon was filing false claims, stealing property from homesteaders who died or disappeared, including... Garrett paused, consulting his notes. Including your own ranch, Mrs. Boone. Technically, Deacon never held legal mortgage on your property. The documents were forged. The room spun slightly. All those months of debt, of fear, built on lies. Thomas knew. He was building a case, from what I can tell. He was planning to take it to federal authorities. Then he got sick. Garrett's expression was carefully neutral. Convenient timing. You think Deacon had him poisoned, Elias said flatly. I think a lot of people in Dry Creek died at convenient times for Lyle Deacon, proving it's another matter. The marshal closed his notebook. But what we can prove is enough. There's a warrant out for his arrest across 3 territories. He won't be coming back. After Garrett left, Nora and Elias walked slowly back toward the ranch. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces, and she found herself thinking about Thomas not with the sharp grief of recent months, but with a sadder, softer sorrow. "He tried to protect me," she said. "In his own way, he just wasn't strong enough to finish what he started." "Strength comes in different forms," Elias replied. He gathered the evidence. That took its own kind of courage. They were passing the church when Reverend Bartlett emerged, Maria Rodriguez at his side. The young woman looked different than she had in hiding, head high, eyes clear. She wore a simple dress donated by the church ladies, and her dark hair was neatly braided. "We're leaving for Denver tomorrow," Bartlett said. "Maria's agreed to testify to the federal court about everything she witnessed." Maria stepped forward, taking Nora's hands in hers. "Thank you," she said, accent thick but words clear. "You gave me hope when I had none. You stood up when everyone else looked away." "We all stood up," Nora corrected gently. "That's the only way it works together." That evening, back at the ranch, Nora found Elias on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. She sat beside him, comfortable in the silence they'd learned to share. "I've been thinking," she said eventually, "about us, about this arrangement." He tensed slightly. "You want to leave? Now that Deacon's gone?" "You're free to—" "No." She turned to face him. "That's not what I mean. I'm thinking about how we started you claiming me as your wife to save me from that auction. How it was supposed to be temporary, just for show." "It doesn't have to be," Elias said quietly. "We've built something here. A partnership, friendship, maybe more, if you're willing." She studied his face. This man who'd given her freedom when everyone else saw her as property, who'd stood beside her against impossible odds, who'd shown her that strength could be quiet, that love could grow from respect. "That first day," she said, "you told me I'd always have a choice. I'm making it now. I choose to stay, not because I have nowhere else to go, not because I need protection, but because this is where I want to be. With you." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers gentle against hers. "You sure I'm not an easy man, Nora, set in my ways, too used to being alone." "I'm not easy either," she interrupted. "I'm stubborn and proud, and I've got more fight in me than is probably wise. But maybe that makes us a good match." "Maybe it does," he agreed, and smiled that rare, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. They sat together as darkness fell, hands linked, watching the first stars appear. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The ranch needed work, the town needed rebuilding, and somewhere out there, Deacon was still free, but tonight they had peace in each other and the knowledge that they'd chosen this life together. A week later, Dry Creek gathered for a real wedding. Not a desperate claim made to save someone from slavery, but a true joining of two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way. Reverend Bartlett performed the ceremony in the church, now packed with townspeople who'd learned to stand together. Nora wore her mother's dress, carefully preserved through all her travels. Elias had trimmed his beard and donned his best suit, looking uncomfortable but determined. When he spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I promise to respect you as my equal, to stand beside you in whatever comes, and to always remember that love is not about possession, but about choosing each other, again and again, every day." Nora's own vows were simpler but no less meaningful. "You gave me freedom when I had none. Now I freely give you my heart, my partnership, and my promise to build a life with you founded on trust, respect, and love." When they kissed, the church erupted in cheers. Even crusty Jim Henderson was seen wiping his eyes, though he'd deny it later. The reception was held in what had been the Yellow Rose, now transformed. The windows were uncovered, the walls freshly painted. The rooms that had held so much misery now filled with laughter and music. They'd decided to turn it into a school and library, a place of learning where ignorance had once ruled. "From a house of sorrow to a house of knowledge," Mary Patterson said, raising her glass in a toast. "That's the Dry Creek way. We don't just survive. We transform." As the evening wound down, Nora and Elias slipped away from the celebration. They rode back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, the familiar path feeling new somehow. Everything was the same, yet everything had changed. "No regrets?" Elias asked as they unsaddled the horses. "None," Nora said firmly. "Though I do have one question." "What's that?" "That day at the auction, why did you really do it the whole truth this time?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because I saw myself in you, someone whose choices had been taken away, forced to live by others' rules. I spent years drifting after the war, lost and angry. Took me too long to realize that the only way to be free is to help others find their freedom too." "The war," she'd suspected but never asked. "That's a story for another night," he said softly. "Tonight's about new beginnings, not old endings." They walked toward the house, their house hand in hand. Behind them, the barn that had sheltered their allies stood strong against the night sky. Before them, the window glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming. At the door, Elias paused. "There's something else. Something I should have said before now." "What?" "I love you, Nora Boone. Not because you needed saving, not because you're beautiful though you are. I love you because you're fierce and brave and you make me want to be a better man. I love you because you see the world as it could be, not just as it is." Tears pricked her eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I love you too, Elias, for your quiet strength, your unshakable integrity, and for seeing me as a person when everyone else saw property. But mostly, I love you for giving me the space to discover who I really am." They entered their home together, closing the door on the past and opening their hearts to whatever future they would build. Outside, coyotes sang to the moon and the wind whispered through the grass. But inside was warmth and light and the beginning of a love story that had started with chains and ended with choices. In the morning, they would wake to ranch work and town business, to all the mundane tasks of daily life, but they would face them together, partners in every sense of the word. The auction post that had once bound Nora still stood in the town square, but now it served a different purpose, a reminder that even the worst symbols of oppression could be transformed by courage, community, and love. As Nora lay beside her husband, her true husband, chosen freely and completely, she thought about the journey that had brought them here, from widow to property to wife to partner, from desperation to hope to love. It hadn't been easy. And it wasn't over. Deacon was still out there, and the work of rebuilding Dry Creek had just begun. But she was no longer afraid. She had Elias, and he had her. They had their community, their ranch, their shared strength. Most importantly, they had proved that love born from respect and choice was stronger than any chain. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was Elias's breathing, steady and sure beside her, and the distant sound of an owl calling across the prairie wild and free, the way they all were meant to be. Spring came early to the valley that year, painting the hills with wild flowers and filling the air with promise. Nora stood on the porch of what everyone now called the Boone Ranch, watching the sun rise over land that truly belonged to them. 6 months had passed since their wedding, since Dry Creek had stood together against tyranny and won. The ranch had transformed under their joint care. The barn stood straight and true after repairs. The corral held twice as many horses, and a vegetable garden thrived where once only dust had gathered. But the biggest change was the small house being built on the eastern pasture, the first of what would be many. "They're coming," Elias said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. He no longer wore the sheriff's badge, having passed that responsibility to Jim Henderson once order was restored. "Should be here by noon." They were the Garrett family homesteaders who'd lost everything to Deacon's schemes, now returning to claim what was rightfully theirs. It was part of the transformation of Dry Creek, this slow healing of old wounds. "Mary says 3 more families are planning to come back," Nora said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The Stevensons, the Youngs, and that German family, the Mullers. Town's growing, changing." Elias sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Sometimes I wonder what Deacon would think if he could see it now." "He can't," Nora said firmly. "And that's what matters." They'd had word 3 months ago. Lyle Deacon had been caught in California, trying to establish another of his operations. The trial had been swift, the verdict just. He would spend the rest of his days in federal prison. His empire of cruelty finally ended. "Mrs. Boone, Mr. Boone!" A voice called from the road. Young Timothy Patterson came riding up, his horse lathered with sweat. "Ma sent me to fetch you. It's time." They exchanged glances. Sarah Morrison, Jake Morrison's widow, who'd come seeking sanctuary after her husband's death in a barroom brawl, had been due any day. She'd found shelter with the Pattersons and work at the new school, slowly rebuilding a life free from her late husband's shadow. "Tell your ma we're coming," Elias said. "And Timothy, slow down on that horse. No baby's worth breaking your neck over." The boy grinned and rode off, though at a more reasonable pace. Nora gathered her medical bag she'd been learning from Dr. Patterson, discovering she had a gift for healing to balance her talent with numbers. The ride to town showed all the signs of Dry Creek's resurrection. New businesses had opened where boarded-up shells once stood. The school rang with children's voices. Gardens bloomed behind houses that had been empty for years, and at the center of it all, where the yellow rose had dealt in misery, stood the Dry Creek Library and School, its doors open to all. They found organized chaos at the Patterson house, Mary directing operations with military precision, Dr. Patterson calm amid the storm, and Sarah herself showing the quiet strength that had carried her through so much. "About time you got here," Mary said. "This baby's eager to meet the world." Hours passed in the ancient rhythm of birth pain and encouragement, fear and hope mixing like storm clouds. Nora worked beside Dr. Patterson, learning by doing, while Elias waited with the other men on the porch, pretending they weren't worried. When the baby's cry finally rang out strong and healthy and absolutely perfect, a cheer went up from the gathered crowd. Word had spread, as it always did in small towns, and half of Dry Creek had assembled to welcome its newest citizen. "It's a girl," Nora announced, emerging onto the porch with a smile that could have lit up the whole territory. "Mother and daughter are doing fine." "What's she going to call her?" someone asked. "Hope," came the answer from inside. "Hope Elizabeth Morrison." It was perfect, Nora thought. What better name for a child born into freedom, in a town that had rediscovered its soul? Later, as they rode home in the gentle evening light, Elias was unusually quiet. Nora knew his moods by now, knew when he was wrestling with words. "What is it?" she asked finally. "Watching that today, new life coming into the world, got me thinking. About..." He reined in his horse, turning to face her. "About family, about the future. We've built a good life. Nora, the ranch is thriving, the town's healing. But sometimes I wonder, do you want more?" She understood what he was asking, what he was too careful to assume. "Children, you mean, if you want them. Only if you want them. I know we never discussed it, and I'd never pressure..." "Elias?" She stopped his words with a gentle hand on his arm. "Yes, when the time is right, when we're ready. Yes." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after a long night. "Really?" "Really, though fair warning, any child of ours is likely to be stubborn as a mule and twice as headstrong." "Wouldn't have it any other way." He laughed, and they rode on home with hearts lighter than air. The ranch welcomed them back with the familiar sounds of horses nickering and chickens settling for the night. As they tended to the evening chores, working side by side in comfortable rhythm, Nora reflected on how natural this had become. What had started as a desperate arrangement had grown into a true partnership, each day deepening the roots they'd planted. After supper, they sat on the porch as was their custom, watching the stars emerge one by one. The night was warm enough that she didn't need a shawl, and the air carried the scent of growing things. "I've been thinking about expanding," Elias said. "That meadow by the creek would make good grazing. Maybe bring in some cattle to go with the horses." "I've been thinking too," Nora replied, "about starting a loan fund for newcomers. Help families get established without falling into debt like I did. The banks agreed to back it if we manage the books. Using Deacon's own seized assets to help people instead of trap them, there's justice in that." That's what I thought. They planned and dreamed as the night deepened, building their future with words and hope. Inside the house, the accounting ledgers sat neat and ordered on Nora's desk. The ranch records transformed from chaos to clarity under her careful management. Beside them lay her journal, not Thomas's record of crimes, but her own chronicle of redemption and renewal. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another, their wild song echoing across the valley. Once, that sound would have made her feel small and vulnerable. Now it just reminded her that they were part of something larger, this land, this community, this life they were building together. "We should head in," Elias said eventually. "Early morning tomorrow. The Garretts will need help getting settled." But neither of them moved, content to sit a while longer in the peace they'd fought so hard to win. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. There would be crops to plant and horses to train, newcomers to welcome and children to teach. The work of building a community was never done. "Do you ever regret it?" Nora asked softly. "That day at the auction, you could have ridden on by, kept your simple, quiet life." "Every choice changes us," Elias replied. "I could have kept riding, sure, stayed alone and safe and small. Instead, I chose to care about something bigger than myself. Found a wife, a community, a purpose. How could I regret that? Even the hard parts, the danger, the fighting. Especially those, they showed me what we were made of. Showed the whole town. Really, sometimes you need a storm to clear the air." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him. Thomas used to say the West was too hard for gentlefolks, that it would break anyone who wasn't born to it. Maybe, or maybe it just teaches you that there's different kinds of strength. You weren't born to this land, but you've made it yours. Made it better. That takes its own kind of power. A falling star streaked across the sky, bright and brief and beautiful. Nora made a wish not for herself, but for Dry Creek and all the souls finding new life within it. For Sarah and her daughter Hope. For the families returning to reclaim their dreams. For the children who would learn to read in what had once been a house of sorrow. "Come on," she said finally, standing and offering her hand. "Tomorrow's a big day." They went inside together, to the bed they shared and the life they'd built and the future that stretched before them bright with promise. Through the window, the stars continued their eternal dance, watching over a ranch where love had grown from the rockiest of soil. As sleep claimed her, Nora thought she heard the whisper of wind through grass, carrying the scent of rain and growth and endless possibility. The West was still hard, still demanding, but it was theirs now, shaped by their hands and hearts into something worth having. The old Nora, the widow who'd stood on that auction block, would barely recognize the woman she'd become. That woman had been surviving. This one was living. The difference, she'd learned, was having something worth fighting for and someone to fight beside. In his sleep, Ellis reached for her, and she moved closer. Two souls who'd found each other in the most unlikely way. Outside, the ranch slept peaceful under starlight, the horses safe in the barn, the garden ready to grow. The whole spread a testament to what could be built when people chose hope over fear. Tomorrow would come with all its demands and delights. But tonight, they rested in the home they'd made, strong in their love and ready for whatever the dawn might bring. The auction post still stood in Dry Creek Square, but now children played around it, treating it as nothing more than old wood and rusty nails, which in the end was all it had ever been. The power had always belonged to those who refused to bow to it, and in a ranch house on the edge of tomorrow, two hearts beat as one, proof that even the darkest chapters could lead to the brightest endings. 10 years had passed like seasons in the valley, each one bringing its own trials and triumphs, sorrows and celebrations. The Boone Ranch had become Boone Valley Ranch, sprawling across lands once held by fear and greed, now flourishing under careful stewardship and honest work. Nora stood at the cemetery on the hill, placing fresh wildflowers on Thomas's grave. She came here every spring, not from obligation but from gratitude. His meticulous records had helped restore a dozen families to their rightful lands. In death, he'd found the courage that had eluded him in life. "Mama, look!" a small voice called out. 7-year-old Samuel Boone came running up the path, his sister Grace toddling behind on 5-year-old legs. "Papa says the new foals are ready to see." "Careful, Sam," Nora cautioned, though she smiled at his enthusiasm. The boy had his father's steady nature mixed with her fierce spirit, a combination that promised interesting times ahead. She gathered Grace into her arms, the little girl's dark curls tickling her cheek. "Shall we go see the horses, then?" They made their way down to the expanded stables, where Elias stood with Jim Henderson and several other ranchers. The spring horse sale had become an annual event, drawing buyers from 3 territories. But more than commerce, it was a celebration of how far they'd all come. "There's my family," Elias said, his weathered face creasing in a smile. 10 years had added silver to his hair and deepened the lines around his eyes, but he moved with the same quiet confidence that had saved her that day in the square. Young Sam immediately launched into questions about the horses, while Grace squirmed to be put down so she could pet the barn cats. Watching them, Nora felt that familiar warmth of completion. This was what they'd built from the ashes of oppression, not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of freedom. "Mrs. Boone." Mary Patterson approached, graying now, but still energetic. "The school board meeting is this afternoon. We need to discuss the new teacher positions." The Dry Creek School had outgrown its original building twice. What had started in the transformed Yellow Rose now occupied a proper schoolhouse with 6 classrooms and a library that was the pride of the territory. Nora served on the board, using her financial skills to ensure every child had access to education regardless of their family's means. "I'll be there," Nora promised, "right after the sale concludes." As the morning progressed, the ranch filled with the sounds of commerce and community. Families who'd once cowered under Deacon's shadow now stood tall, their children playing together without fear. The transformation was complete in ways both large and small. "Remember when this was just empty land and broken dreams?" Jim said to Elias as they watched a young couple inspect a mare. "Now look at it." "We all built this," Elias replied. "Every one of us who stood up that day." The young couple were the Washingtons, freed slaves who'd come west seeking a new start. Dry Creek had welcomed them, as it now welcomed all who came with honest intentions and willing hands. The town that had once sold human beings now stood as a beacon of what the West could be: harsh but fair, demanding but rewarding. "That's a fine animal," Mr. Washington said, running experienced hands over the mare's legs. "What's your price?" As Elias negotiated, Nora noticed Sheriff Henderson talking urgently with Dr. Patterson near the corral. Something in their posture made her excuse herself and approach. "What's wrong?" she asked. Henderson's face was grim. "Ryder came in this morning. There's been trouble up at Silver Creek. Group calling themselves the New Order, trying to establish the same kind of operation Deacon ran." Nora's blood chilled. They'd always known evil wouldn't die with one man's imprisonment. "How bad?" "Bad enough. They've taken over the town, installed their own judge." "Sound familiar?" Henderson spat in disgust. Federal marshals asking for witnesses who can testify about how these operations work. People who've stood against them before. "We'll go," Nora said immediately. "Elias and I, we can—" "No." The voice was quiet, but firm. Elias had approached without them noticing, Sam's hand in his. "We've got children now. We can't go riding off to fight other people's battles." "But if we don't help—" "We'll help," he assured her. "But different than before. We'll send letters, testimony, support. We'll help them organize like we did here. But our fighting days are behind us. Nora, we've got something more important to protect now." She wanted to argue, felt the old fire rising. But then Grace came running over, arms outstretched, and Nora caught her daughter up, feeling the weight of this small, trusting life. Elias was right. They'd fought their fight. Now it was time to preserve what they'd won. "We'll write everything down," she said to Henderson. "Every detail of how Deacon operated, how we stopped him. Make copies for any town that needs them." "That'll help," Henderson agreed. "Might save some folks from learning the hard way like we did." The conversation was interrupted by Reverend Bartlett, aged now, but still standing straight, calling the crowd to attention. It was time for the annual remembrance, a tradition they'd started 5 years back. "Friends," Bartlett began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "We stand here today not just to trade horses or share fellowship, but to remember those who suffered under tyranny, those who found courage when courage seemed impossible, and those who stood together when standing alone would have been safer." He walked to where the old auction post had been moved. Now standing in the ranch's main yard, they'd thought about burning it. But Nora had insisted on keeping it, not as a monument to cruelty, but as a reminder of what they'd overcome. "This post once represented everything wrong with our town," Bartlett continued. "Today, it stands on free land, surrounded by free people, a testament that evil only wins when good folks do nothing." 10 years ago, Elias stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "I rode into town and saw something that shouldn't happen anywhere, let alone in America. I saw a human being treated as property, and I saw a town too scared to stop it." He looked at Nora, and she saw in his eyes the same love that had grown from that desperate moment. But fear isn't stronger than courage, and one voice speaking truth can wake up a whole community. We proved that here. Others will prove it elsewhere. The crowd murmured agreement. Many of them had been there that day, had found their own courage in the crucible of confrontation. The children listened wide-eyed, hearing again the story of how their town had found its soul. "Mama," Grace whispered. "Were you really scared?" "Yes, little one," Nora said softly. "But being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave. Sometimes it's the only way to be brave." As the remembrance ended and the crowd dispersed back to business and pleasure, Nora found herself at the post with Maria Rodriguez Washington, now married to the young man inspecting horses, mother of 2, and teacher at the school. She'd returned to Dry Creek after testifying against Deacon, finding home in the place she'd once been prisoner. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Mr. Boone hadn't spoken up that day?" Maria asked. "Every day," Nora admitted. "But he did speak up, and that made all the difference." The afternoon brought the school board meeting, discussions of budgets and books, plans for expansion and dreams of a future where every child could read and write and think for themselves. It was quieter work than facing down gunmen, but no less important. As evening approached and the ranch emptied of visitors, the Boone family gathered on their porch as they did every night. Sam practiced his letters while Grace played with a doll Mary Patterson had made her. Elias whittled a toy horse, his hands steady and sure. Nora worked on the promised letter to Silver Creek, carefully documenting every detail that might help them. "Tell them about the ledgers," Elias suggested. "How keeping records of everything helped prove the crimes." "And about the women standing together," Nora added, writing steadily. "How Mary and the church ladies made the difference." "Don't forget the post," Sam piped up, proud to contribute. How we kept it to remember. They worked together as night fell, a family forged in crisis but sustained by love. The stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning, now watching over their continuance. "Papa," Grace asked sleepily, "will you tell the story again about how you saved Mama?" "Your Mama saved herself," Elias corrected gently. "I just gave her the chance." But he told the story anyway, as he'd told it countless times, as it would be told for generations. How a quiet cowboy had stood against injustice, how a widow had found her voice, how a town had remembered its conscience, how love could grow from the rockiest ground if given respect and choice and time. As the children drowsed and the night deepened, Nora and Elias sat together in comfortable silence. The letter was finished, ready to send hope to another town struggling against familiar darkness. "No regrets?" Elias asked. "Their old ritual?" "None," Nora replied, as she always did. "Only gratitude." The ranch slept peaceful under starlight. In the barn, horses settled for the night, including descendants of that first mare that had carried them away from the auction. In the house, children dreamed safe dreams. In the yard, the post stood its silent vigil, wood weathered but unbroken, a reminder that some chains were meant to be broken and some stands were worth taking. Somewhere out there, in Silver Creek and a dozen other towns, people faced their own versions of Lyle Deacon, but they wouldn't face them alone. The letter would go out tomorrow, carrying hard-won wisdom and hope. Others would find their courage, raise their voices, stand together. The West was still hard, still demanding, but it was also vast with possibility for those brave enough to claim it. And in a valley where love had conquered fear, where community had defeated tyranny, where the future grew brighter with each passing season, two people who'd found each other in the darkest moment continued to choose each other in all the moments that followed. "Wanted her," Elias murmured, echoing words from long ago. "More than gold, whiskey, or freedom." "And got all four," Nora whispered back, "because real freedom means having someone to share it with." The coyotes sang their ancient songs. The wind whispered through grass that would never stop growing. And, on the Boone Valley Ranch, built on love and watered with courage, the harvest of hope continued to bloom, season after season, year after year, as eternal as the stars that blessed them. Thank you so much for listening to this story of courage, love, and the triumph of the human spirit in the Old West. I hope Nora and Elias's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine in the telling. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed Wanted Her, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more authentic frontier tales. Give this video a like, and hit that hype button to help more people discover this story of how love and justice prevailed in Dry Creek. Until we meet again on the dusty trails of the past, partners,